Okay. Hello, hello. In this stream, I am going to do a 0 to 100% fluid simulation. So the goal is going to be to set up a scene with some decent materials. We're going to use some modeling and sculpting, and then we're going to run that fluid simulation, play with the settings just a little to get it to look as nice as we can, and then try to get this entire thing rendered out. And then I'll probably post our result as a short or a short video depending on what we come up with. So yeah, so that should be a lot of fun. If you end up stopping by, let me know what you think, and guess what else I can change in the scene. Let's switch this here to the live chat. Okay, yeah, and I think we're good to go. And sorry if you were waiting for the earlier time. We had one of our pets out, and we were looking for it, so we were running around doing that a little bit, and um, did as much as we could with that whole issue right now. So on to the stream, I guess. So first things first, we are going to delete the default cube. We actually will not need it for this scene. I am just going to add a plane. We'll scale it up quite a bit. And then I'm going to actually move it just a little bit. And I'll probably have a waterfall that comes off of this side, and then the base will be a little bit more square. So maybe I will move it back this way. But basically we're gonna add details with editing. And I'll just add quite a few because I'll need them once we put materials on. Okay, and then let's just use edit mode here. All right, and I'm just going to kind of make this little bit of a slope here for the waterfall. And then I'm going to extrude this face. And so we'll kind of put like a little pond up on top of this. Add some extra detail there. And then once I get this close, I will duplicate the mesh, and then we'll actually unsubdivide it one time and thicken it so that the fluid simulation does better with it. And then we'll take this original mesh with the higher detail on it. We'll subdivide it more than this and apply the material to it. So we'll have an invisible object that the fluid interacts with. That's super simple, and it's kind of a low poly copy of this. So once we get our sculpting done, we'll do that. But I think we might need to make this bottom edge a little bit further out. Let's just do that. And I'll subdivide that. So we basically want to have a little bit of a pond in the top. It'll flow through the middle and kind of fall off the side here. And ideally it'll splash down into like a little pond here and then start running forward off of the plane here. And then we'll have an object that removes the fluid on this side. So it looks like it kind of flows out and flows away. So, and really, we don't need to use sculpting tools. We can just do it in here. So let's just start our little pond here. Basically, the idea of this is just going to be to get a spot for the incoming water to sort of bubble up. And then we'll have a low spot right here where it kind of spills over. Let's just keep it lined up a little bit. Okay, so something like that. We'll have an object inside this pool that will emit the water. It'll flow over the side and splash down into the bottom. Yeah. And then let's put a little pool down here on the bottom too. Let's maybe put it more in the middle. Basically what we want is for everything in the middle of the channel here to be lower than the edges. So there will be this little splash pad kind of thing. And then, let's just do it this way. Kind of bring these sides up. Because we don't want the water just to be bouncing off the side of the simulation. It's just not going to look as cool if we have it doing that. So I'd rather have it interact with the plane itself here. And let's see, what else should we have? Really, this face here is going to probably be a little worn too because the water is always flowing on there. So maybe do that. Let's bring all of these edges up just so our fluid isn't attempting to flow backward as much. Really, the top of this doesn't matter too much, so maybe just crank it up a bit. Okay, the other thing I don't want to happen is I don't want to have to spend a whole bunch of time baking just adding the fluid to the top until it runs over. So I might make just a one-time fluid object in there and one time in the bottom so that we start off with some fluid ready to go. And that way we're not waiting for it just to fill enough to run. Okay. Yeah, and a lot of this isn't going to be super exact. And bro, why wasn't I subbed? I don't know, man. I don't know. You ought to be now though, right? Now that you've seen this wonderful lumpy corner connector here that we have. Yes, it is YouTube's fault. That's true. It is always YouTube's fault. Okay. So we're gonna try to start with this. I could have put money on. Yeah, yep. Well, I don't know. Maybe YouTube's removing my subscribers for some reason. You never know. Maybe I've offended the YouTube gods. Looked for the live button and couldn't find you. Well, I don't know. I did change the time it was scheduled to, and I guess that wouldn't explain not having a subscription, but um, the notices probably get messed up. Oh, you're on a different account. Okay. Poor man with sub channel. Oh, okay. See, now you're gonna sub twice. All right. Oops. All right. I'm gonna add a solidify modifier to this guy, and we'll make it decently thick. That's probably plenty. So by doing that, I've made it kind of a closed shape instead of just a plane. And doing this will prevent the fluid from clipping through this. So if your fluid voxels are smaller than the size of your object or the thickness of your object, it's it's um, it's possible they can clip through. And once they start clipping through, they have glitches. Okay, YouTube. Claiming my bitrate's bad. Let me know if the picture quality goes downhill really bad. Okay, we're going to call this ground. And I'm actually going to go back into edit mode and subdivide this a couple more times because we're going to add some really cool texture to it. Okay, and then I'm going to come in here and I am going to duplicate this entire thing. Now we're working on the duplicate. This we're just going to call the, what should we call it? Ground collision. Okay, and we're gonna actually remove the, well, no, we don't want to do that, do we? Yeah, let's leave the collision we want to be thick, and the normal ground doesn't need to be, so we'll take the solidify off of that one. So now here I'll hide the collision object. So this is the ground. This one's going to be the high detail one with texture on it. It is just going to um, basically show all the little surface details from the rock and sand and whatever we end up adding. And then the ground collision, this object, um, which is the thick one, this will actually interact with the fluid. So if we look at this, definitely doesn't need that much detail. So we will add a collapse. Oh, decimate. We'll add a decimate and just unsubdivide. Really, we can probably go quite a few times. Let's just do that many. That shouldn't be too hard to run. And then I'll apply that. So now we have a relatively low poly collision object, which helps the simulation run faster. And then we have a more detailed plane that'll look nice, that'll sit on top of the fluid sim. So that's our two objects we're working with. So for now, I think we should start making something interesting like little rocks or whatever. But before we even do that, we should probably start the fluid sim and see how it's going to flow. Because as much as you want to, you can't really control the fluid simulation all that much. So you want to preview it and see what it's going to look like. So let's actually turn the ground off for now. Turn the ground collision on. Okay, so to add the fluid simulation, we need a few things. We need a domain, we need fluid objects, and then we can have fluid inflows, we can have fluid outflows, and we can have objects that just start as a fluid. So I am just going to hit create domain. Oop, we don't want to do that. Never mind, hold on. Flip domain. We don't want to do that yet. You can add a domain. I actually had this selected, which we don't want. I'm just going to add a cube back in. And we'll just make it a little bigger than the object. So I'll try to scale it in all the right directions so that it just barely fits around it. And maybe sits right inside. So we don't want the fluid to flow outside of the object, basically. So I'm just going to get this scaled up so that at no point the fluid will leave the plane. So now if you look at this cube, which will become basically the outer bounds of where you can have your fluid go, you want that to basically enclose the entire simulation area. Okay, so let's, with the new cube selected, that I'll just rename it domain, and then I'll hit create domain. So now this wireframe object here is where our simulation can occur. Yeah, that should look fine. The next thing we can do right away is select our ground collision object. Come down here, click obstacle. So now flip fluids add-on will know to have the water interact with that plane. And then let's just start adding an inflow object and see what it looks like. Okay, so we're going to put one up here. I think, honestly, it doesn't probably matter, but let's just use a sphere. And I'm just going to try to place this sort of in the middle of this little hole here. And then we'll scale it up. So once we turn this into a fluid, you won't see the actual sphere anymore. It'll just turn into a fluid that basically an inflow. It'll just look like water bubbling up from there. Okay. So let's call that an inflow for now and see what it looks like. So we'll select the sphere. We'll call this inflow object. And if it takes too long for it to make enough water to flow over the side, we'll just add extra water basically. So let's, first things first, let's save. So we don't want to lose our scene already. And then with the sphere selected, hit inflow in the flip fluids menu. And now this thing has become wireframe as well, which just means that it's been assigned flip fluids operation basically. And then for now, let's not run any outflows. Let's just see what it looks like. So I'm going to save it one more time. And I'm just going to bake it. We'll see what happens. And so the baking shouldn't take too long. We're not going to have anything in the scene that's moving. So yeah, it looks like it's going pretty fast, but let's see if it's emitting any fluid yet or not. Okay, and then one thing I know you always have to do is you have to come turn the water on. Yeah, there we go. So it says we've already got about 60 frames done. Uh-oh, it's clipping through the object. Okay. So more than likely that means that the fluid is starting off clipped through this plane. So we want to make sure that our fluid emitter is above. It looks like it's not clipped through it, but let's just try again and see what happens. So I'll move it up here and see if we can get a better result. Baking for the win. Yeah, I don't know why they call it baking. It's interesting. In Blender and 3D in general, anytime you're calculating something and saving it to memory, they call it baking. Oh no. It's still going right through the object. Okay, so I think I know what we forgot to do. So let's stop this again. I'll reset it. You need to select your collision object, and we added the flip fluids obstacle option, but we also have to go to the normal settings, and you have to add a collision physics property to the object as well. So now if I bake this again, now it should interact with it instead of flowing right through. We'll see. We need a few more frames here. Nope, still flowing right through. What do we got going on here, flip fluids? Collision object. Thickness outer. Definitely can make it a little thicker. Some of these settings you just have to play with. Animated mesh, none of that should matter. Mesh, And this one is basically going to shrink up any holes, although there shouldn't be any. This is only meant to be used to prevent leakage in fractal objects and only small values. Okay, so that's probably not going to be the solution there. But yeah, see, this is just flowing right through it still. So we don't want that. Let's pause and reset it. And let's go back to export animated mesh on these objects. I don't know. I guess we can try to apply all the locations so that it doesn't think they've been animated, but this is an inflow. This is an obstacle, so that should work fine. Now, it is possible that as soon as the baking starts, it's clipping through the plane because the resolution's low. And if that's possible and it starts off by clipping through, the simulation might run with fluid falling through it. Definitely, it's definitely interacting with it a little because it's looks like it's widening out. Hmm. Ground collision. Inflow object. Okay, let's try to turn this up just a little and see what happens. It's possible too that we need a little more resolution on our fluid, which we for the sake of time, we really don't want to add a whole lot of extra detail, but the whole point is for it to interact with the plane, so we definitely need it to work. Still going right through. Okay. So I think we have a setting that's not quite right on the collision object. Friction, single-sided. Override normals. I don't know if that'll do it or not. Okay. Yeah, so this is always the biggest problem with fluid simulation is before you get any sort of results, you have bugs and errors for a while. Yeah, it definitely just wants to go right through that plane. So I'm going to go to edit mode, select all of them, recalculate the normals, just in case it's got the plane backwards, which it very well could. Ground collision. Okay, so you have got plenty of thickness. It's set as an obstacle. Huh. Reset. Let's try to bump up the resolution a little. Because I do know that sometimes too big of resolution will clip right through stuff as well. Or too low resolution, I should say. Oh, that looks promising. Okay, so I think, yeah, I think what we had was just, let's look at this in wireframe. if your fluid object, these are called voxels, the triangles there, if those are smaller or if they're bigger than the detail on the plane, they can easily clip through it. So I think that's all that happened. We could have just made this thicker to start than we did, but it should work okay how it is now. So, and actually, technically, this object we're going to eventually hide. So now that we know it's there, we can turn back on the ground and turn off the ground collision. So now, yeah, so here we go. So now the fluid will flow in some way or other, and it looks like there's definitely not enough friction because all the water is just flowing right off the sides. But basically, we want this pool on the top to fill up with water and then just have the fluid kind of drain off the middle here. And what we're seeing down here is our collision object is that thicker one. It's this guy. So there's some amount of thickness that lets the fluid go inside of the plane, and doing that makes the render look better. Because if you have a gap between the fluid and the plane, there is it literally will just look like there's air bubbles underneath, and you'll see some really weird artifacts. So um, it looks weird from underneath, but that's actually what we want to see. Oh, had a little explosion there. So that normally means that the fluid got bunched up. So basically underneath here, the fluid simulator got confused right in here for some reason. And it caused this little explosion to happen, which, as cool as it is, it's not exactly what we want in this little simulation here. Or maybe we do, I don't know. So I've had that before where, again, not enough resolution, and your fluid surface, which is this thing, will clip into the collision object. It kind of gets into like a spot where the geometry is pinched. And I don't know, I would just say it gets confused basically, and it blows up. And it throws the fluids everywhere. I'll probably have to add some basically like damping, which will take the extra energy out. So if I look at if I look at the settings for a collision object, we can try damping up here. I don't think it's going to work for this though. We definitely want to add friction because the water was just sliding all over the place. So we'll put it up to like 0.7 and try it. Expand geometry. We might want to take that off now because we've got our resolution working, I think. Okay, so I'll come back up here and stop this again. Okay. And we're running it on a resolution of 90 still. So let's try that. And as you can see, fluid simulation is very iterative. You just have to start and stop and test and retry. I'm sure there's ways to do it with geometry nodes, but I've never seen anything get as good of results as a real fluid simulation. I am hoping that someday geometry nodes are so good that you don't need to bake stuff like this, but I don't think we're quite there yet. You can get really good approximations, but once we get a material on this, it's going to look great. Okay, so yeah, so basically we wanted a little extra friction so that the fluid isn't just sliding all over the place. We want it to stay contained in this little pond up here. Okay, and that looks like it's going to be all right. So basically, the workflow from here, what we're going to do is we're gonna set a resolution that we think is going to look okay, because Blender can keep working, and then we're going to take this guy, our ground object, and we're going to go to Substance Painter and add some rocky or soil or sandy material, whatever looks good, and then we'll just kind of paint on there to try to get a nice little backdrop for a fluid sim. And then I think what we'll do is let the thing bake on nice high resolution so that hopefully when we come back we have a really good simulation. And then we'll start to add some like grass and little extra scene items. Maybe some rocks or something, you know. But we can let Blender bake the high quality simulation while we're adding materials. See, and this effect that we have here is really good. It might even be a little too much friction, but that's why we test these things. Okay, so it got done with what it was doing. I want to see a little more. So I'm actually going to crank this end frame on our timeline here up to 500, and then I'm going to go back into the fluid simulation, and now it's updated the frame range from 1 to 500, so I'm just going to hit the resume baking button. So it will re-export the animated data, which it really probably doesn't need to do since nothing's animated, but sometimes that helps with errors and glitches. But now it'll just resume from where we had already baked at up to 250 frames. Okay, so basically all we need to do now is make sure that this thing is going to flow in a way that we like. And if we can get it to come down the waterfall and look decent, then we'll crank up the resolution and go from there. But the other thing I want to add is just like how this sphere up here is adding fluid, we can add an object down here that's going to subtract fluid. So basically, the fluid will come fill this little pond and then start flowing out this way, and it'll get removed. So if we set our camera like right here, you're gonna see the flow coming off of the frame, but you're not gonna see it just magically disappearing. So it's gonna be kind of a nice little, um, just an effect to make it look like it's flowing away from us and we're not looking at it. Okay, so now the water's gonna start flowing. So let's just play back what it's got so far. So it definitely looks like caramel or chocolate or something right now. It's not watery enough, and that's partly because I turned up the um, friction so far. Yeah, see, it's definitely not flowing fast enough. And we could definitely turn this into lava or something. But if you guys want it to be lava, then you would have to tell me that in the chat, I guess. Let's see, is there even a good material in here for lava? I don't think I have a shader for lava. We could do like caramel or beer or something. Um, yeah. Yep. Okay. So we'll think about that. But that's also probably part of why this bake is taking a little while. Yeah, we definitely need some friction though. Because if we don't have any, the water just goes everywhere. But it definitely needs to fall more than this. And this isn't running in real time by any means, but let's switch to frame dropping. So now when the playback runs, it'll just disclude frames to try to hit the target frame rate, which is 24. So you can see on my screen up here, it's trying to stay at 24 frames per second, and it does it just by skipping frames instead of showing them all. Yeah, see, that's definitely too thick. Okay. So let's go back to our collision object. We'll reset this bake one more time. It's always super, super sad to reset a bake that you've um, already had running for a while, but it is what it is. Okay, let's go down to like 0.3 friction and see what that does. Now we won't let it bake for the whole time this time. We'll just do like, oh, I think 30 frames will be plenty, and we'll see if it looks right. And then um, we can stop it one more time, crank up the resolution, see what it looks like. I am tempted to add the whitewater particles, which is the foaminess, and because that'll look really good, but also that adds a ton of computation time, so we'll have to just decide. Okay, let's see. We got about 30 frames, 40 frames. See, that looks okay. Definitely doesn't look quite as sticky. Okay, some of this time is just sitting here waiting for it to bake, which that it just is what it is. I don't know. That might be okay. we don't want it to be flying off the side, but we also don't want it to be sticking. I think I think once we get our fluid to be thinner, it's actually going to look okay right here. Yeah, so that's cool. Cool. All right. So next step's going to be to crank up the resolution, and we'll come back in a minute and see what it looks like. Honestly, we should probably add the sheeting effects too. This is looking sick. Yeah, it honestly though, even at this stage, this blows my mind because if you look at it like right now, it just looks like it's doing what it should. I mean, it doesn't look real yet, but just the little like how it spreads out after it splashes down like that, it just looks so crazy. And like before there was this kind of tech and simulation stuff, you like imagine doing that by sculpting it or something. It would have been awful. Okay. And actually, if we want to just put on, let's just put on some volumetric water, and let's go to our cycles preview, and we'll check it out. We'll just see what it looks like. Oh, let's set our samples pretty high. Okay, now I should be able just to see what the fluid looks like. Okay. Our domain needs to hide in the viewport, so we don't really need it. The other reason everything's grayed out is because we don't have a light. So on here, let's go add a sky texture for the background. Okay, and then there's multiple options for sky textures. You can just kind of check them out. We'll stay with Nishida for now. And you can play with all these settings just to tune the light. But you can do cool stuff like changing the ozone and dust and such in the air will just make the background look different. Let's take the dust up, air up. Maybe the ozone up too. So now it'll kind of look like a little sunset type of thing. Okay, and we don't have any actual lights in the scene, so the plane isn't really getting anything yet. So we're gonna have to actually deal with that. So we have this little light that comes with the scene. I'm gonna turn that to a sun. I'll just play around with some light settings for a second. But yeah, this thing's still baking away, so waiting for it. Yeah, looks like it's still getting a little bit of that exploding effect going on, which is okay. That'll probably go away with our resolution going up, but we can already tell that it's flowing downhill. Yeah, there's your volumetric effect for the water surface, which we probably don't want to use. Maybe the Ocean 2 material. That'll look kind of green like that. Okay. Um, and the other option we have is we can just come in here and apply an HDR image, which should be showing on the scene here. So you can always just cheat and add an HDRI in here, and it just looks great without doing much. So maybe I'll just stick with that. Turn the strength down a little, and then we'll turn on our ground object. Okay, so you'll be able to kind of start to tell what the goal is here soon. But this thing's going to be sand or rock or whatever, and then we're going to have this realistic water flowing. So that's kind of what we're doing. Now, ideally, what we end up with is a very put together little scene where we have some trees and grass and the soil type varies from the channel inside to the top of the banks and stuff like that. But we'll see how far we get, because the whole point of this one is to get it done somewhat quickly. Okay. Now, I see the baking is kind of frozen at 252. So I'm wondering if it kind of had an error there. Yeah, and see it's starting to explode there. So for whatever reason, and it might just be too low of resolution, we might want to crank that resolution even higher. Otherwise, we're going to get some messy stuff going on. Otherwise, yeah, I think it's going to look cool. So I'm going to stop it. Okay, I'm going to reset it one more time. Where is our domain? Click on that. Okay, now we're going to, instead of 90, let's try 200 for the resolution. Let's avoid the whitewater for now. Oh, what else can we do here? Let's add sheeting effects. So basically this will make the water stick to itself, so the little particles of water will, instead of separating, they'll be stuck together into a sheet. And then you can add all kinds of stuff like surface tension, viscosity. So you can make it look like caramel. You can make it look like, like a fly sitting on the water where it's got that little dip in it. Okay, now what I did was increase the resolution. So now our simulation surface is much finer. So the detail should look a lot better here now. It's just going to take a little bit longer to bake it. Although it looks like it's actually running fairly fast, so that's good. One thing that I have noticed is if you have a large processor, like mine has 16 cores, you may not use the entire thing if you're doing a smaller resolution. So once you get a finer resolution like this, you might actually use more of your cores, and it may not run any slower than the smaller simulation, which is kind of weird. But the way these work is just every set of points on here is assigned to a core, and the data has to flow in order. So um, you can't the data can't skip in and out of cores very well. But yeah, here's what it looks like now, just with that one change. Definitely looks more like water. Okay, and actually, I'll pull up Task Manager here for all the nerds. But here is our CPU graph here while it's baking. So uh, basically, all the threads are getting used a little bit from time to time, but only a few of them are under full load, like most of the time. So it's really weird how this uses the processor, but I don't think it would benefit you to have 64 cores or anything like that because uh, none of these are actually running at 100% speed anyway. So, and maybe Intel's way of having the little E cores and some P cores would be good for this. I don't know. I don't have the ability to test different systems as much as just a different GPU. So someday I'll be able to tell, but okay, let's see what this looks like now. So our highest frame is about 150. Okay, yeah. So that's starting to look really good. Okay, so um, one thing I'll point out already about the shape is see the little like the V-shaped kind of pouring effect, like right here, that you would see if you were pouring like a water out of a water bottle. That's kind of what we want to get at because that's going to look super cool. And I think once our little pond fills up and this fluid object keeps emitting more fluid, it's just going to start to fly over the side more. I think this is going to look awesome. And this might even be plenty of resolution. So um, let's actually, let's stop it one more time. Painfully, of course. Let's go back to the start here. I'm going to bump this resolution up just a little more just for fun. We're going to throw in whitewater and we're going to go do our textures. So let's enable whitewater. We don't probably need all of the kinds. So there's like 3 different kinds of foam and bubbles and stuff in here, and I would say we're probably not going to need all of it. Like spray isn't going to probably matter too much. Maybe we'll leave foam and bubbles, but those add a ton of time to the calculation. So I'm going to put it into our viewport shading mode so we're not using up our processor just sitting here. And I'm going to save because this is always the time when you lose everything. Okay, now I'm going to start the bake. So now what we need to do while this is running, because it's going to take a while, we need to go to Substance Painter and apply some materials. So now if I was going to do as good of a job as possible, I would spend a few hours doing materials, but tonight that is not the goal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come grab this ground object, okay, and it's just this very simple plane. I'm going to go up here to UV editing. Okay, so I hit A, which selects all. And what it's done is it's put all of these points, and let's see if I can show you here. Whatever I select on my screen here is the part of the texture image that's going to be like painted. So if I select this and I paint there, it's going to paint this line on the image onto this object. So now that's obviously not what we want because that's not to scale in any way. So I'm going to select all these and hit U and hit unwrap. Okay, so now what Blender's done is it's taken all of those points and um, it's laid them out in a nice orderly fashion, and it sort of kind of tries to keep them in line. But since it's such a simple object, I am very tempted just to leave it how it is. Okay, and then the other thing that we have to pay attention to is we're probably going to need um, relatively high resolution image. So I'm actually gonna select these and rotate them so that they fit on the plane better. Okay, so what I've done is I've unwrapped this, and basically this plane now has data that says how each point on this plane relates to every other point. So now if I come and paint on here, it knows how to apply that paint onto the 3D object. So the UV unwrapping on this side is the conversion from how humans see in 3D to how a computer sees a 2D texture. Okay, and then somewhere in there it translates the 2D texture into um, well, how do I display that on the computer? So once I've done that, now I can export this entire plane. Okay, so I'm gonna make sure I have the ground object selected. I'm gonna hit File, Export, and we're gonna export an FBX file. And it looks like we're in the right folder. So I'm gonna add a new folder for materials. Okay, and we're gonna call this ground selected objects mesh geometry armature. None of this stuff should matter. Export FBX. Okay, now I'm going to come in here and open Substance Painter. Now, Substance Painter is not free by any means. It's fairly expensive, but I think if I had to pick one application for people to buy, it would probably be Substance Painter. And between Substance Painter and um, the other texturing tools it has some AI driven ones and stuff. It's absolutely the biggest time saver. I know there's a lot of drama about Adobe all the time, and they really do make you pay up for it. But let's uh let's just show you why I like it here before you get too mad. Okay, so I'm going to come up here. I'm going to say new template PBR metallic roughness alpha blend. That's fine. We'll select our file. Okay, so we're going to go. Actually, we're on completely wrong drive here. Blender, water sim, materials, ground. There we go. Okay, we're going to open the ground file. Now we're going to need a huge texture, so we're just going to try 4K. Hopefully that's enough. It should be. I have auto unwrap checked. So basically it's going to go look at our UV image that we made and say, okay, that looks fine. And if it doesn't like it, it'll adjust it. And that's about it. The rest of it is set up. So let's just hit OK. And here in a second or two, now you can see the 3D object here in Substance Painter. So now what's really, really cool is I can either drag materials onto this from my collection here, or I can paint them. And I can do any combination of that by layering it. So let's just start looking for some good basic materials. And there's a ton of them in here, but let's just type in rock. Okay, so we've got these little previews are going to take a second to load because I think they're actually from the internet. Desert rock, fractured desert stone, large river rocks. Let's try large river rocks. Okay. Doesn't look like they are loading. There we go. Now they are. Okay. So now, you can see here on the right side, this is the UV image that I moved. On the left is the 3D representation. So now it looks 2D. It looks like it's just a 2D image slapped on top of that. But what's really, really cool is this map, this texture actually has vertical data inside of it as well. So the first thing I want to do here actually is scale this, because I want the rocks to be quite a bit smaller. So maybe something like that. Eventually you'd be able to see there's tiling. So like right now you can't tell that it repeats too easily. But if I crank this up a lot, your eye will start to notice that there's repeated patterns every so often. So we don't want to do that. And there's kind of tricky ways to get around that, but yeah, for now we'll just do something in there. And I can come change these settings around as much as I want. I can also change the lighting here, so let's do that. A lot of the times I'll use studio lighting so that it's a lot softer instead of having the directed lighting. So the shadows are very minor. It's easier to tell what your displacement looks like. So now that we've done that, let's come in here and play with some of the um, actual displacement properties. Okay, so as I start to mess around with these, you'll be able to see that there's an effect on the actual look of it. So let's put the height, crank the height up. And now not all textures are going to have a ton of displacement. So it looks like this one doesn't actually have as much. So let's try to crank the normals again. Yeah, and I don't think we're going to get a lot by doing that. Okay, so um, what we should be able to do is get some height information off of this, and it'll actually appear in Blender as if it's bumpy. Let's see if we can get some more though, because this doesn't look to me like it's doing enough. Yeah, that's not even changing it. And oh, here, maybe I have to turn height on. How about that? Okay, and now some of the materials aren't going to have as much adjustability. So now this looks decent. I don't think it's displacing the mesh very much, but that might not really matter. So uh, other things we can try though. So we could easily come in here and select a different layer. And let's say we didn't like that rock. We want it to look more like, oh, maybe like this, like some sand. Let's just replace this with the sand. Okay, and then you can still see there's rockiness in there. But I'm going to actually hide the rock layer. Okay, so now here is what the sand looks like. So this actually will have quite a bit more vertical displacement to it. So if I come in here and I change the height position, we should be able to get something that actually shows the shadows a little more. Okay, so now it's just going to make our little surface look a lot more bumpy here. I'm actually kind of leaning toward using just sand here, and then we'll paint some rock on top. So maybe we'll do that. So let's delete our little rock layer. Come in here and add a paint layer, and then let's get some more river rock. Okay, so now I've got this little paintbrush. I can paint the river rock on top of it. I'm going to make the brush quite a bit bigger. And okay. Yeah, that looks pretty cool. So now I can place this rock pattern wherever I want. So maybe we'll just have more of the rocky stuff in the bottom of the river here. Okay, so now one thing to note, if you're going to spend a whole lot of time on this uh, little scene, you would probably model a little more. You know, you would block out some of these areas and make the textures blend in a little bit different way. I think we're still going to have this looking really cool though. So now I'm just going to add another layer. So I can just come in here and keep adding different layers. Let's try these large blocks here, see what that looks like. So maybe we got just a couple on the sides. I'd really like to see that give us more height information, because you should be able to see um, even in here you should be able to see the actual plane move. Yeah, see that looks okay. Not sure if I love the color though. So let's change it a little bit. So we don't have a lot of that pink in our other palette, so let's just make it a little more gray. Yeah, that's kind of cool. Um, and then we want this to be a little more random, probably. So let's have, actually what I like to do is have the material paint as the brush moves. So I'll click this follow path, and then as you drag your mouse, it'll kind of slide around the side there. Okay, and then uh, you know, one thing you've got to do is you got to keep in mind what your end result is going to have. So we probably aren't going to even need as much of this as I'm putting on here. But let's maybe put a bit of a like rock face down there, put a little on here, just so it looks kind of like it's worn more. And then oops, what we're gonna actually do is we're gonna put a little grass on the sides and stuff, so it's not gonna need this. Okay, so for the last little bit here, I'm just gonna use some soil. Hmm. See if we can get a good one. That's not the kind of dirt we want. It's like grime. Okay, apparently that's all I have right now, so let's try leaf covered soil and see what that looks like. That's okay. Not sure we need that and the sand, but let's just paint some on and check it out. Maybe some of that with the rock in the bottom there will look okay. And we'll put a little up on top here. And then realistically, we're probably not going to have a lot of this sand on the side here, so maybe I'll just make that a little bit more rocky looking. And let's have the size even bigger. I need to come take that pink out again. Just make it a little darker even. Okay, yeah, and that's kind of cool. Kind of an interesting blending that it's doing there. That'll look okay. Yeah. All right. So we have a little bit of a rock face and then a pond on top, little pond, and then our little stream on the bottom. So for now, let's call this good. So we're going to export textures. I'm going to select the um, file location. So let's go to materials. Okay, and then I'm going to make a new folder in here. And this is just going to be ground mats. Select folder. Okay, now what it's going to do is it's going to spit out a batch of these texture files, and they have different parts of the mesh information like color and height. So I'm going to close this for now. Actually, we'll save this file. We'll go back to our folder here. We'll just call this ground file. Okay, so that if we want to modify it, we can. Ooh, okay, well, it crashed right as we left, so I guess we're got out a little safe. So let's turn our ground collision off here in the viewport. I'm going to select this ground object. Now I'm going to go up here to the shading tab. Okay, now this thing doesn't even have a material yet. So all we have to do is add a new material. I'm going to click on the shader. I'm going to hit Control, Shift, and T all at once. And then I'm going to navigate to where we save these material informations. Select all of them. Select this principled texture setup. Hit go. It'll take just a second. And now we have our texture loaded into Blender. Okay, so one thing to know is the displacement won't probably show up properly yet. So we need to enable it in our material settings. Where are we at here? So we want displacement and bump. And that's under settings in the materials, under this material, and just this displacement option. Okay, so if I come in here and I start to mess around with these settings, I should be able to make the actual displacement of the mesh more apparent. And here, let's turn on some real lights because that'll help us see it. Yeah, see, so we cranked that up too high, and now we have this big displacement going on. So we want to stick around what, let's see. We want this to be probably world space. Object space. What do we have going on here? Oh, that's our displacement. Okay. So normal map I'll leave. Displacement is definitely out of hand over here. Especially for the one material. Sheesh. So I think a little bit's okay, but that one was definitely too much. So here I'm scaling the material, and it's basically pushing and pulling the mesh around. So the one material has a lot of height information, the other one doesn't. So we're just going to put this on a very small number. And basically what it'll do is it'll create just a little bit of height information so that it'll look bumpy, but it shouldn't be causing any real weird problems. Okay, and then I'm going to turn this normal map strength down a little. Okay, so we've got kind of this little worn rock wall with some displacement on it. Let's go back to our layout tab. And you'll be able to see what it looks like here on the 3D view. So now again, I could do a bit with different textures and spending more time on it, but the point of it is not to do that. It's to actually get this thing done tonight. So let's do that. We also can check on our fluid sim. So keep in mind the fluid sim's been running this whole time. And hopefully it hasn't just exploded everywhere. No, actually it looks like it's doing really well. And one thing we didn't do that we should have is add that outflow object, but maybe we won't even need to. Okay, so let's just see what this looks like. Okay, so one thing that we've got going on here is our displacement is sticking out further than where the fluid simulation is. And normally that would be kind of a problem, but I think we'll just move the entire plane backwards slightly until we can see our water. Actually, let's not even do that. Let's just go back to our shading. Because we can see what it'll look like. And see our water's just clipping through here because when you have this displacement map on, it's actually going to move the surface of the object. So if we have it going too far, it's just going to completely cover up our fluid sim, and that's not what we want. Okay, yeah, so now we can actually turn some of these settings on. Give us a little bit of scale, but not too much. Okay, let's see how that looks. Okay, yeah, that's starting to look a little better. I'll save it again. Okay, so yeah, for whatever reason, when you bring textures in from Substance Painter, the normal and displacements are scaled up a lot. So you'll just want to check on those. Let's play this back. Let's just see. So honestly, we might just be happy with what the simulation looks like right now. Okay, so it just fills up the top, starts to spill over, and then it fills up the whole bottom down here. And maybe that's cool. Maybe we like that. So if I was going to run it like in a loop, I would um, I would have the fluid flow out of the bottom down here, but we may not really need to do that. And this thing only has about 11 frames left. So I'd say let's just see what it looks like when it's done. And we can decide if we want to keep it or rerun it, but it's just going to kind of look like it floods the bottom here. But I think this will be a cool little first run of this fluid simulation. So these things you're seeing here are the bubbles. So basically what this add-on does is it actually makes little teeny tiny spheres. So if I turn, well, you can't really do that, but they're very hard to see. They're tiny little spheres, but you actually need to scale them up to even be able to see them. So I'll show you that. Let's just call them point. Let's just call them 0.1 and see how big they get. Now you won't be able to see them very well until you have to uncheck this hide particles and viewport button. You have to do that for just one. It'll apply to all of them. Okay, and then you'll see as I play with the scale of this, it'll make these physically larger. And what's the other thing? We need to add a material to them. So that's the other part that we have to do, or you won't be able to see them. We'll add bubble to bubble and foam to foam. Okay, and then we definitely want to turn on showing these things in the viewport, but they should be easier to see than they are right now. Let's make sure they're turned on. They should be. Let's look at our camera here. And we're going to lock the camera to view, and let's just take a little snapshot of this real fast, and we'll see what the foam looks like. Okay, so it's just going to load for hopefully not too long. Come on, come on. Yes, and fluid simulating is basically 2/3 or more weighting. So, this is still just initializing running one frame for the render. So that's going to be a problem, obviously, if we're trying to run 500 frames. Okay, so you can see right here the particles are just these big spheres. Okay, so it just looks like there's foam floating on top of the water, like 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 broken up packing foam. So there's just these little bubbles. We don't want that. Obviously, that's not going to do us any good. So I need to try to get them to look correct in the viewport. Don't know why they aren't. And then we definitely don't want that many of them. Got to give Blender a second here to try to crash. Okay, so if you have any takeaways from this, it's that fluid simulation is irritating and takes a lot of time. On top of it's cool. Come on, come on. Just want to go back to viewport mode. Okay. So Blender is attempting to crash right now. We'll see what happens. Um, the other big performance problem with this kind of thing, yeah, don't crash Blender. I know it's bad. It's a it's a whole lot of data. Let me show you here. I'll click on the um, maybe. I'll click on the domain object. Oh, come on. This is just not going to let me do anything. The problem is at this point I don't even know what it's loading anymore. But this mesh that is the water surface is made up of almost 10 million points. So, you're going to have some performance problems trying to load. You're not going to be able to scrub through the playback. Oh, here we go. We might have got lucky. All right. Okay, so now I think it's loading. Yeah, now we can actually see our foam particles, and clearly they're way too large. So 0.01 may have actually been correct. And I'm thinking that you just have to scrub. Yeah, that might be all. You might just have to scrub through the viewport to get it to load those again. I'm actually really surprised Blender didn't crash there. Normally you don't get lucky. Okay. So let's take off the overlays. Now you can see what the foam is. It's just little spheres in the water. So that was the only goal there, was to try to show that. Okay, so wherever you have rough enough water, the simulator will spawn these little particles. And basically when you're far enough away, they look just like the foam that forms on disturbed water. So let's hopefully, if we get lucky, let's load these further out scenes, or these frames, and see what they look like. Okay, that's working all right. I think our world properties, where is that? Oh, we ended up taking that off, didn't we? We definitely have a bit of a fogginess in our world here. Or it's just maybe too dark, but we need a little bit more light, I think, to make the fluid look a little bit more realistic. And here, I might actually switch this over to the kind of normal clear water that you would expect in this kind of a little stream. I don't think it'll be this green ocean water. Oh, yes, yes, keep trying to crash. I think our foam stuff is a decent size, so maybe we'll leave that alone. I'm going to switch back to viewport mode here. I keep trying to look at the preview, and it's just a bad idea. One thing I think you can do, though, is you can switch it to a preview mode in the settings down here. So let's change our whitewater to the preview. Okay, now we should be able to load the viewport just a little better. But let's wait on that. Okay. Turn our overlays back on here, which is just your viewport control stuff. Come on. So if I click on the domain of the simulation, that's where the main info is. And I scroll all the way to the bottom. There's a flip fluid stats. I'll open that up. And I just want to show you the problem here with these fluid simulations. The entire fluid simulation, the baking for it, is almost 20 gigabytes. 18.8 gigabytes. And that's all the data to run the surface and the foam. And so basically, if you're trying to scrub through, or if you're moving from one frame to another, it has to reload, however much of a gigabyte that frame takes up. So once you get to this point, you have to be careful with what you're trying to do, because Blender has to recalculate everything. Like you can see, even to move it, it's got quite a delay on it. Okay, let's turn our surface to preview as well. Not sure how much that's going to help us in actual speed. Yeah, not much. But basically, that's what our little simulation looks like. So I think the next step would be to add that outflow object so that our little pond doesn't fill up here. I think it actually might just look cool, so maybe we'll leave it. But I don't know. What do you think? Should we add some grass right now? Doesn't take super long, but we haven't even got to rendering yet either, so keep that in mind. I'm gonna go ahead and take a camera view at this real quick. And it looks like we had scrolled our camera at some point. There we go. We got too far away from it. And in the camera settings, I am going to set our clipping distance back a little. Okay, and for all of you photography people out there, the cameras in Blender work more or less like a real camera. So you have a fair bit of control over how they work. So if I want to change focal length here, it'll do just what it should on a real camera, which is kind of cool. And it gives it a nice kind of different view. You can also play with that to get, you know, an isometric view. You can get different kind of styles with it, so that's really cool. Uh, but yeah, I mean, there's a ton of camera settings in here that I don't even normally use, just because I don't really know what they are. But basically, you treat the camera in this the same way you would treat a real one. Okay, so what is the actual required VRAM? I am going to go back to this real fast. So here's the biggest problem with rendering this. I can run it. These frames seem to take quite a while to load, but if it's more than about, well, if it's more than 8 gigs of VRAM, it's going to take me an extra amount of time because I have fewer GPUs that have enough VRAM for that. So let's see here. It's taking like dozens of seconds just to load the white water and the bubbles. Come on, come on. So what I want to do here is just get this started. Okay. Yeah, that's actually looking really nice. Otherwise, we'll change the type of water. Um, but I think that's going to be fairly nice once we get some good lights on there. Okay, so I'm going to come in here and see how much VRAM we're using. So it looks like, and this is probably just as bad a scene as any will be, or a frame. It looks like we're at about 10 gigs used, maybe almost 11. So I do have a bunch of 12 gig GPUs, so I'll probably have to render on those. But yeah, this is a little bit of a picture of what it'll look like. We definitely have some too much of a normal effect going on here on this rock face, so I'll have to modify that so it doesn't look as grainy. So let's do that real fast. Okay, so hopefully that looks a little better. Can probably bring the displacement in a little bit too. Okay, and then let's change our water material. So what's cool here is you can change the material of the fluid without rebaking it. Like you're not you're not changing how the mesh works, you're just changing the material. So thankfully that's just a like a render setting. You don't have to go through and rerun everything. Okay, so let's go back here to a simpler frame. Maybe 50. Let's see what this looks like. Okay, and then I'm gonna set up a couple lights, and I think we're gonna render this because we are getting toward the 2 hour mark for this stream, and uh, it's going to be another couple hours if we were to add a bunch of plants or something. So I can show that later, but I think this water looks the best. It's just a clear one. And the surface of the fluid looks a little weird because we're still running that preview mode, so it's not going to look correct. So basically I'm just looking at the color, and then the other thing I'll have to do is place the camera. So for now I'm just going to kind of do something like that maybe. Okay, and then we need to play with our lighting. So let's just crank the sun up to 10. That's maybe too much. Let's go to 8. And then you can change the angle, which is kind of the sun angle or how high the sun is in the sky. So if I go straight over it, there's all shadows. Yeah, so the other thing to note is we have the background adding light, and we have the um, the actual sun. So we have multiple light sources, and I definitely don't want to make it too dark, but I don't want it all overexposed either. Okay. So these frames are actually not rendering too slow. This one's only 1080p, but that only took about 24 seconds on this 4090. So I might be able to get final one here soon. Um, I'll leave it there for a second because I know my stream's only 720p, so hopefully you can see kind of what it looks like. So right now that's what we have. Um, if we change, if I want the actual world to show up in the render, I'm gonna have to change the settings a little, I believe. See, the world won't show up, so showing the HDRI in here as it is now, it's not actually going to appear this way. So I would have to tell Blender to use the HDRI as the background. So let's try to do that if I can remember where that is. Background. You know what? And maybe let's just use, well, you can use an environment texture. You can use sky texture was actually pretty nice, which we may just do that. So let's do um, sun elevation. Let's bring the sun up. Let's hide our actual sun for now. Change the strength of this sky texture a bit. Yeah, see, so that's going to actually bring out some of the shading and texture that we should get with our surface. Okay, I'm going to turn off the camera and zoom in here. Okay, so definitely have too much like dust, too much air. kind of do like the blue effect, so I'll turn that up a little. And I will say I'm not as used to lighting and scene setup as I am, say, like character design, so it's definitely one of the things I need to learn more about. But let's check and see what that looks like. So now you can see we've got kind of that little blue background going on. I would say my environment is definitely still overexposed, so I'll try to fix that a little, but oh, that's because we left the sun on. So this sun is adding to the scene, and it probably shouldn't be. And then I'd say let's turn off the sun intensity on here a little bit. Not too much. It's probably better to have more light in the scene than too little, but anybody who's a photographer could probably speak to that more than I could. Because really, this stuff is the same as photography in a lot of ways. So let's set up our camera so that we catch the corner of it down here, and we don't show our sphere up at the top too much. Okay, let's turn off our sun, try another render and see what it looks like. And then I am going to start to send this bad boy to some of the render machines because I think it's going to look pretty cool. You're messing with your camera right now? Nice. I assume you mean your real camera, not your one in Blender, right? Yeah, photography for the win, dude. It's kind of the same. It's kind of the same thing. Um, really good Blender users can use the camera properly, and it makes a lot of difference. It really does. It matters. Okay, I think the only other thing is our whitewater particles might be just a little too big. Yeah, your real camera. Yeah. No, that's cool. What you need to do is take those drones and start scanning a bunch of stuff. That's what you should do. Sun intensity. All right. I'm actually happy with our janky little simulation here for now. So I'm going to make my whitewater particles just a little smaller. I think actually what they started out was probably fine. Um, there's a ton of settings in here. So if you look at this, it's like how fast the particles spray, how long they live, how many it spawns if the water is turbulent enough. It's wild. And I don't know how to tell you how to use that other than just to go try it because there's so many settings. But it's really cool what you can do with it. Um, Setting up my gimbal. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, so you've got to get it tuned in or something, huh? It's interesting that you would have to set it up after you get it. I didn't know that. I've always wanted a drone, but I'm not sure I need more hobbies. So we'll see. All right, made my particles a little bit smaller. Come on. So I want them just to give a little bit of fuzziness to the very edge of the sharp parts of the water. I don't want it to be like you shouldn't be able to pick out a particle very easily. Got to balance it. Interesting. The gimbal is one for my Canon camera. Oh, it's not for a drone then. Okay. So it's like the gyro thing that keeps the camera steady. Oh, yeah, yeah. Okay, that makes more sense. I was wondering why you would have to configure the drone's camera. That makes a lot more sense. All right. I think that actually looks just a little bit okay. So let's think about rendering here. So now I think um, in the future, maybe sometime this week, I'll add some extra details to this. I don't know if I'll do it on a stream or a video or not, but I'll post the final thing later on, and I might even rebake this with the outflow object, so it looks like it just keeps flowing down the stream. But here in just a few seconds, hopefully this looks okay. I'm gonna send this to the render farm, and I can show how I set up the render process with this sort of thing. And when we get some denoising done, hopefully we can tell what this looks like. Yeah, so the really cool thing about these fluid simulations is that um, I haven't had to do anything with materials. The foam on the top of the water or the little foam particles, that's all generated by the simulator. So I don't have to tell Blender to do it by geometry because you could program it basically so that um, certain features of the mesh would trigger the foaminess. I didn't have to do any of that. You get this like cloudiness in the water, and that's just from how it's reflecting the light. And all of that, yeah, it takes a while to wait for, but doing that with geometry nodes or shader tricks would be so much harder. And um, you can't beat the realism of this. So if I really wanted to be crazy, I could bump up the resolution even more and tune the fine tune the water so that the white water was um, only had certain length of life, so it kind of fades out once the water's calm, stuff like that. But there's just so much you can do with this. It's wild. So I don't, it's not a perfect scene, but I think it's gonna look pretty dang good in the render. Let's see what was. Hopefully this still has the VRAM performance. But yeah, so this took 2 minutes on a 4090, so it's gonna take almost 4 minutes on a 3090 slash 3080 Ti slash whatever. So this is going to be a fairly intense scene. I guess it doesn't help that I had it open in the render preview either, but let's just let's save this. So now I'll show you what I do. So I'm going to take this entire folder. I'm going to copy it to my render farm. Paste this. It's going to take a while because it's massive. Okay, so we'll let that go. Um, and then what I'll do is I'll actually close this and I will work off of the file that has been shared because then the settings are the same for all of these different machines and I don't have to worry about um, making sure they get the right frames and stuff like that. So I'll close this version of Blender or this version of the file. Okay, now you can see it's moving the folder. I think once it gets through some of these little choppy files, this transfer will actually be kind of fast. But maybe I just have this. I just have this PC, the storage PC, hardwired so that I should theoretically be able just to send these files right over. Yeah, here. So now it's going. So now it's sending every single frame of that surface for the flip fluids and the whitewater particles. And I think it was about 25 gigabyte file. So once I get through the smaller choppy frames, this should go really fast. But I think I normally get about 60 megabytes per second over the hard line, which is way faster than my internet. Obviously, that's why I'm on 720p streaming. But okay. So I wrote myself a sticky note. I'm going to use renders 1, 7, 10, and 11 because those have cards. I'm just going to, while I wait for these files to transfer, I'm going to get Blender ready to go on each one of these machines. Yeah, and it looks like some of them won't even have Blender 3.6 installed yet. But um, sometimes I have power outages, and these Dells are hard to get to restart on their own. So I might as well go check and make sure that all of these computers are ready to render. So that's render 1. We're going to do that. Render 7 is sitting by me, and that's the one with the Intel GPU. So I'll start that one up. That one actually um, is surprisingly fast, so that'll be nice. Uh, get our Blender going on each one of these machines, and we'll hit the road. So if each frame's going to be about really up to between 2 and 4 minutes, this render might take a while, but all of the first frames are going to be easier than that, so it's hard to know for sure. One. Number 7 might not be booted yet, so let's try number 10. That'll start another one here for render 11. I think like 10 and 11 should be on just fine, so I'm not sure if they would have an issue or not. Okay, here's number 10. This one does have 3.6 already, so that's good to go. What card is this one? I think this one is, yeah, this is the 2080 Ti Kingpin. So that's a significantly overclocked 2080 Ti. That'll be nice. Render 11 has 3 high power GPUs on it, 2 3080 Ti's and a 3080, so that'll be super nice. This one's just interesting because they're on risers, so I have to run them separately, or I basically can't run just one Blender with all the cards running together. They don't work very well. Didn't even have Blender 3.6 installed yet. It wouldn't matter. I would use 3.5, but I know the Flip Fluids version that I set the scene up in was compatible with 3.6, so I'm not sure if it's back compatible. Probably isn't. Well, this one's going to get done fast. Okay, there's that one. There's this one. Okay, and I think our scene is getting close to done. It says it's going to take an hour and 20 minutes, which is not true. I'll let that sit for a minute. Let's try render 7 now while we're waiting. Render 7 will be ready to go as long as it's booted. I've had issues with remote desktop on render 7, and I'm not sure why. It's a relatively modern, I think 10th gen i5 processor, so I'm not sure what the problem would be there. Okay, so that one's going to load. Okay, this one's ready to go. So let's switch these around. So render 1's good. Render 10 should be good. Render 11 should be good. And render 7. What do we got going here? Not quite sure what it's doing. Another user. All right. Shouldn't be too many users except me here. Come on now. Sign in. I know if I minimize this, it's just going to not work. So you got to let it load up. Okay, we're going to try anyway. Because our file is basically about done. And then we can get this ball rolling. Okay, we can also close Adobe software. Don't really need that. This guy is still trying to sign in. Come on now. Every single little frame has to be sent. And every operation you start and stop just takes forever. Someday I'm gonna have a 10 or 20 gigabit system for transferring files so that this doesn't take this long. Come on, half a gig shouldn't take that long. Yeah, so the drive I'm transferring these to is a RAID 0 drive with 4 hard drives. So I'm hoping that it's stable for a long time, but you never know when it's just going to suddenly crash. So, all right, I think we're good to go. Look at that, render 7 even booted up. So now I'll have my desktop. I'll have these 4 other PCs with a 4070, a 2080 Ti Kingpin, two 3080 Ti's, and a 3080, and then the Arc A770 GPU from Intel. Those should all have enough VRAM for this scene, and they're very fast processors, so I think we're going to have absolutely no issue getting this render done quick. But all I have to do now, okay, is open the shared version of the file. So I'm going to do that by opening Blender 3.6 to make sure that I open it in the right version. And so that is the first version. Oops. Okay. So now I know that if I open all of these in the same exact um, in the same location, then the settings will be the same. So now I just need to make sure that my render settings are hardware agnostic. So, like for instance, the denoiser has to be open image denoiser or it won't work on other cards except NVIDIA. If I use optics, it's not going to work on the Intel one. It's just going to cause it to crash. So if I save this file how it is, okay, and then I'm actually, let's render at 2560 by 1440, just because I think that will look a bit nicer. 24 frames per second should match how we baked it. Okay, and then output. So here's the other big key. Um, we have to set these up in the right output folder. Okay, so I'm going to set up a render frames folder, and now when I save this file, all of them will open. And I'm going to turn off overwrite and turn on placeholders. That means when one machine starts a render, the other machines will see that it started one and it won't overlap or it won't overwrite that file. And then it'll just go on to the next frame. And placeholders is every time a machine starts a file, it starts a 0 size file to hold the name so that there aren't two trying to run the same frame. Okay, so now this is the one I opened from the storage file. Let's make sure the materials are running. Okay, so I open it in render view and it looks like it's just fine. So should be good there. Okay, so I'm gonna actually just get this one going. So I'm gonna hit render animation, and the frames are gonna just start to roll in, hopefully. Yeah, see, they won't take too long. Especially these first ones, they'll be really fast. So I'll minimize that, and then it's just a matter of doing the same thing on each computer. So if you're actually, if you're seeing this and you're thinking about building a render farm, the way that I do it is super, it's not user friendly, so it's kind of irritating. I have to run every computer separately, but it's also definitely tunable and programmable for what you need. So I don't have just a run all button that runs all the machines on the same job. But it's nice sometimes because if I have multiple render jobs, I can decide which machines to put onto which job. So you would really have to know if you need it or not. Okay, now I don't know if Flip Fluid's version will look right because these ones I just installed 3.6 on won't have the newest version. It looks like it's going to work okay though. So I'll just try to load a couple here to make sure. And we're in preview mode, so the water's going to look a little strange, but I think it's going to be fine. Okay, so we're going to make sure you're not in render preview so that you're not using up resources. Let's go to our preferences to make sure that we have NVIDIA optics on. Okay, 4070. And then we're just going to hit render animation. Actually, let's make sure. Yep, looks like we're in the right place for the files. Okay, so here's the 4070 running. Um, Swan Liberate says you use multiple PCs for rendering. Yes. In fact, let me pull up my spreadsheet because I'm going to be starting all these machines. Um, Here is the list of render machines currently. So, um, all of these that you see are set up to render. The storage server PC is a shared drive, so I send every file that I'm going to render on to the storage PC, and then I open that on each one of these worker machines, and they render separate frames. And you'll see here in just a second, a machine called Render 11 actually has, I'll run 3 separate Blender iterations. Um, Swan Lover 8 says, just bought my first build today and got a 4070 FE today with an H1NZ XT mini case. Bad experience with the shop, but excited to see how yours works. The 4070 is a fantastic card. You won't regret it. 12 gigs of VRAM is good. That's insanity. Yeah, I got all these cards because I started mining a couple years ago at the right time, and most of these cards paid themselves off 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 times since I started. So I got really, really lucky because the end goal was always to run Blender animations, and there's absolutely no way I was going to be able to buy these if I didn't get, you know, the mining income like that for the couple of years that I did. So definitely got lucky. If it wasn't for that, I wouldn't have all this stuff, and now I just get to sit here and test it all and share, my results with my YouTube channel. But um, yeah, every now and then I got to stop and look at my utility closet here in the basement and go, is this really like safe or smart? But it's cool. The guys upsold me with 64 gigabytes, but I'm still scared about setting it up myself. Also, lucky you look very professional. It's crazy seeing your stream pop out of nowhere on my feed. Well, that's awesome. Thank you. Thank you for that. I'm definitely a tiny, tiny YouTuber, so I spend my day wondering what I could do better. So it's nice to know that I look professional. That means a lot. Thank you. It's your life now. Don't worry about the fire hazard. Yeah, I've actually only had a couple almost fires, and they were because I plugged in the wrong power adapter to the wrong object. So, um, I think as long as you power your computers the right way, you're gonna be safe. But I see. But yeah, you said they upsold you with 64 gigabytes of RAM. That's not a problem. If you end up being um, if you get into Blender, you can definitely eat up 64 gigs of RAM. I on this workstation I actually run 64, and I have had it full before. So you know, fluid simulations get up to 150 or 200 gigabytes in file size, and basically you have to store all of that in the RAM. The shop sold me a case and traded me another. Both had recalls and something about a metal PCI riser catching fire. Also, yeah, it was pretty overkill. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, if you end up being a Blender user, or I don't know, whatever you're using your machine for, 64 gigs is not going to be that big pretty soon. So, um, it's one of those things you'll just not have to upgrade, and that's okay too. Well, with you saying that, I'm even more terrified. I have an i7, and the case is small factor. Is that going to make my room 100C? Well, the thing with heat is that it's going to get out of your case and into the room no matter what you have. So, like my PC draws, oh, I want to say about 850 watts. Like it actually uses 850 watts when it's running, and all of that heat is going to get into the room no matter what. So, uh, a small form factor i7. I would say if the i7 has a good cooler on it, you're not going to have any thermal problems. You know, your PC will run well, but your room isn't going to get hot you know, just because of your hardware. I Okay, so you have an i7 and a 4070. So an i7, yeah, you're not going to be too bad. It won't be too hot. I mean, obviously it depends on how hot it is where you are and what kind of um, AC you have and stuff like that. But i7 is a moderately high power CPU, but it's not insane. Like the i9s just are complete power hogs, absolutely silly. Um, I would say if you wanted to be power efficient, the 5950X, which is what I have, is probably one of the better ones. But the 4070 is actually a super efficient card, so it's only 200 watts and it's very very fast. So I think that's actually going to be just fine for you. But yeah, I you trust me, you have no clue. It's the heat that you can live in because of your computers is is completely insane. I have additional air conditioners in my basement that just run all year long, including the winter, and it gets really cold here. I just if I leave the heat in the house, it just gets way too hot. Do you sell your works? That's a good question. So far I haven't sold any 3D stuff. I don't sell assets. You know, if somebody contacted me and wanted me to do a character or animation or something, I would definitely consider it. What has happened so far with my Blender career, if you'll call it that, is I've spent a whole lot of time learning about all this hardware stuff, and um, so I've leaned into that a lot, and I've done a lot of rendering stuff for fun. So I haven't. I guess I would say I haven't got to the point where I model and produce final products very quickly. So and the views for the hardware stuff, for the computer hardware stuff, are a lot easier to get than for the Blender stuff. So I kind of split my focus between those. But that's the goal, right? Is to be a professional and make some money in different aspects of the animating. And I actually am going to try to start selling render time as a service. So um, people would be able to contact me and book my machines for so many frames or so many hours per month or whatever. So that's one option that I have because obviously I have a ton of them sitting here. So um, I think there'd be decent money in that. I could make good money from my end, and individuals or small studios would be able to get really good value because I can charge a lot less than the big farms. Have you ever stepped in Cinema 4D or other 3D programs, and what's your experience? I actually have not. Um, Blender and Substance Painter are the two that are most recognizable. I use some add-ons and stuff, but I've never done any of this professionally. So I actually engineer bridges during the day, and then I come home and work on this stuff mostly for fun. So I'm not one of those guys like Grant Abbott or the big guys that have been in the industry before. So um, also subbed, you're dope. Thank you. That's awesome. No, I'm glad to have you. Yeah, I think this stuff is a lot of fun. So thanks for joining on. Is substance for texture? Yes, it is, and it's expensive, but I would say it's probably one of the most useful and most time-saving programs I've ever used in any sort of uh, capacity at all. So like this this texture on this simple like little rock wall and stuff I made here on this scene, I was able to do in just a few minutes in Substance Painter. I probably talked about it for too long, but um, it's definitely like you can just drag on the materials or paint them on however you want. And like to be completely honest, it makes it easy to be lazy with retopology on characters and stuff because you can just paint on them and the UV unwrap doesn't really matter. So uh, I'll pull it up here once I get all these machines running though and show you. But yeah, here's the this is actually the Intel GPU running. So you can see it's grinding through the samples just as fast as like the 4070, maybe a little slower, but would have thought this was a PNG, something very realistic. Nice job. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I it's one of those things. I know ways I could have spent a lot more time on this little scene, and I might add some grass and rocks on it, just for fun, but um that's the beauty of something like Substance Painter, it can add extra effects and realism with minimal work. And people that know how to use it can make real proper use out of it. I don't, I'm more of a slap some textures on guy, and there's people that can really do wild things with it. But okay. Um so you'll like this. This machine is actually a converted mining rig. So it's an open air mining frame. And let me pull up the preferences here. So I pull up system. This will show me the list of GPUs. This one I have a 5800X 8-core CPU on it. And this one actually has 3 GPUs installed, and they're all on single lane PCI risers that you would normally use for GPU mining. So I found that trying to run multiple GPUs in modern Blender, so anything above like Blender 3, I've had problems running multiple GPUs. They don't get up to their full speed. So what I have to do is open one instance of Blender per GPU, and then they'll all run on their own, the proper speed separately. So I'll show you that here. So this one, I'm just going to select the first GPU, and I'm going to open my file. Let's go find it here. I have 7 billion files in here. Okay, and then I'll always just make sure that it looks like the materials came through, which it looks like they did. Okay, and then I'm going to render the animation. So this will start GPU 1, and then I'm going to minimize, and then open another iteration of Blender 3.6. Okay, and then I have to come into preferences and disable the first GPU and enable the second one. Okay, and now I can hit render animation. Since I've opened the same file, the settings are all the same, except for I changed which GPU to be running now. And one more time, minimize, minimize. Open Blender 3.6 again. We'll open this file, edit preferences, unselect the first GPU, select the third GPU, close out of that, render animation. So I figured out that each GPU normally needs about 2 to 4 threads of the processor. So 8-core, 16-thread CPU is enough for 3 or 4 GPUs. So I'll show you here. Here are the 3 GPUs all running at full bore. So let's change this to, well, we do want to stay on CUDA. Yeah, so you can see all 3 of these GPUs are getting as much use as they should. And here's the CPU, so it's definitely juggling all these different cores. But yeah, it's just kind of interesting that you can't really get the full performance out of them unless you split them up. And I don't know if that's a Blender 3.x bug or if it's just the CPU gets confused because of how it's coded or something. But Yeah, so see, we've already got 43 frames done out of 500, so we're cooking. We're cooking right along here. All right, so I think we have them all running. So now I think the problem is, let's look at the task manager here. I think we need more than 10 gigs of VRAM eventually. So I could run the 6700 XT, but if I run any of these other 8 gig GPUs, they're just going to get kicked out. They're not going to be able to render once the frames get too intense. So I won't start those, but maybe I will start this render 5 here. So let's just open one for that guy. We'll see if I can connect to it or not. I think I got them all rebooted since I had a power outage last. And this is one that's installed on the Dell. Yeah, okay. Looks like it was running my Diamond test scene, so should be good to go there. Okay, now what's really cool about Cycles is that I actually have NVIDIA, AMD, and Intel GPUs running the same scene right now, and all of the frames are going to look consistent because they're all set to render with Cycles, and they're all set to denoise with Open Image Denoiser. So the frames should look exactly alike, so there should be no problem with them. But yeah, I got all three brands of GPUs running together on my little render farm here, which I think is cool because there's finally some competition and maybe the consumers will get a break someday. So yeah, so here's the 6700 XT going. Let's see what this one is requiring. I really would like to run all of my GPUs, but some of them can't fit the scene. Yeah, see, they're already at frame 61. We're already exceeding the 8 gig limit, so all those other smaller cards wouldn't be able to handle it, which is fine. Normally, I would also have two 3090s, but they're not set in a machine right now. So I actually took them out to put the Intel GPU in for testing, so those ones would help a lot too. But now, sometimes what I like to do is pull open a bunch of these. Oops. And um, you can actually see them running next to each other, maybe. And you can compare how fast certain GPUs are compared to each other just by watching the frames render next to each other. Why does that keep happening? It's irritating. There it is. Really? Come on, Windows. All right. Looks like render 7 just crashed Blender here. So not sure what happened there. That one is the Intel GPU though. So that's not great. um, which also means that we have created a broken file. So um, one thing that I'll have to do after this is done rendering is I'll have to come back and find any of these frames that have a 0 size and delete them and rerun those frames. Sometimes they just crash. I don't know that. I don't think they're overheating. They're just there's just driver errors still with Intel GPUs, and I've had it happen with all brands, so it's really not just those. But definitely want to look into why that happened before I keep throwing frames at it. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that one off for now. Um, okay, yeah, so the 4090 is on frame 75. So this is going to take a bit to render. I think the other things I would do, maybe just add some grass on the sides, maybe some extra interest stuff like rocks, actual physical 3D rocks on here instead of just the texture. And then um, I could add my little fluid outflow object so that the fluid just flows away from the scene, kind of down and to the left. So those are things I may or may not do in the future, but um, I will I will compile this and let me think. What's the best way? Maybe I'll just show it on a video. I'll just post the render of it. Maybe a short, but probably not. So that you guys can see it, but there's no reason to sit here and wait for all of these to render because it is going to take a bit. And as much as I would love to throw all my machines on it, I can't because a lot of them are 8 gigabyte. So it just is what it is. Um, Maybe we'll try this Intel one more time. I'm just wondering if the denoising doesn't work on these, maybe. I know most of the times that I've had crashes with GPUs are actually because I have the wrong denoiser selected. So if I open a scene that has optics selected on an AMD GPU machine and I don't change it, it'll just have nothing filled in on the denoiser slot, and I don't think it defaults to the automatic selection. It just is blank, so that causes crashes. So you just never know how Blender's going to crash because it just really likes to. But yeah, we're only on frame 85 out of 500, so it's going to be a while. We probably won't sit and watch them. So I'm going to probably just close down the stream here soonish. So if you have any questions or any thoughts, let me know in the chat right now. Otherwise, thank you to everybody who has been hanging out with me. I love having you guys on the stream. It's a lot of fun. It's definitely more relaxing for me than trying to cram content into a short video. So, if you're a fan of the live stuff, just keep watching them, and we'll try to come up with some good ideas here. Swan, let me show you the substance real fast because I didn't do that yet. Why not use EV? I don't know as much about EV. I know that with the water, I don't think EV is going to work as well, but I'm just not as used to it. Really, is the easiest answer. It's something I have wanted to learn more, but I just wouldn't know. I wouldn't know about the materials, and I don't know enough about the shaders yet. So Yeah, I've got a couple friends that tell me to use EV sometimes instead of just using cycles always. So, I'll be the first to admit that I definitely need to learn it. Um, I'll open this ground file. Yeah, yeah, Eevee is definitely way faster in rendering, and by way faster, I mean hundreds of times, literally hundreds of times faster. The problem is, yes, the materials do take more work, and some effects are not necessarily. I won't say they're not possible, but they're not possible for me. So, having realistic water and caustics and reflection stuff in Eevee is going to be very very hard to do relative to cycles. And it just yeah, cycles is just going to take longer to do it. So that's the trade off. But yeah, even just 14090 can chew through thousands of frames of Eevee rendering in just a few minutes. So you know, Eevee is just a different rendering engine for people who don't know. So the work that this computer is doing right now, this is in cycles, and it just takes a while to do it, but it's more photorealistic technically. So the math and the rendering it's doing is um, physical based, and Eevee I think is more of like a game engine renderer where it has a lot of approximations, a lot of kind of light baking stuff, but it's very, very fast. So if you're doing anything toony or anything where the materials fit, Eevee is definitely a very, very good choice and probably better in a lot of cases than Cycles, just because uh, it it doesn't have to do all the physical based stuff in the same way. But yes, Abdallah, yes, I would definitely need to learn Eevee in the future because some of my friends absolutely swear by it. So I know, I need to. But I think I was just saying a little bit ago, I only have so much time to learn. And so, like even looking at the scene that we're working on now, uh, even just texturing, like in here, there's so much I could learn about Substance Painter, but I haven't got through all of the learning that I could do just because I don't have enough time yet. So, hopefully someday I'll be able to devote most of my week to learning and getting better. But for now, I'm kind of just learning with you guys as I go, really. And that's what my tutorials are about. They're just when I find out something I think that's, super cool or helpful, I throw it up on the channel and hope it's helpful to somebody. But there's definitely a lot more you can do with this stuff than I'll ever be able to learn, I think. Um, but yeah, so let me take all these materials off, and I can show you what Substance Painter is real fast. So this is just the basic plane that we started with at the beginning of the stream. Um, so Substance Painter is cool because you can just slap these textures on here. So I have like this is some sort of leather. I can just drag this right on the material, and it throws it on there. Uh, and then like here, I want it smaller. Okay, scroll. I want to rotate it, It's just, I mean, look at how easy that is. I didn't have to set up any nodes. I didn't have to know how to get that shape. Smashing keys over here, don't mind me. All right. Know the pain. Too many ideas, never enough time. Yep. Yep, that's exactly it. And honestly, that's the thing. You start you start working on an idea, you run into some roadblocks, and pretty soon it's been a whole night and you haven't really got any progress, so it's tough to get anywhere. Um, but yeah, so you can slap textures on, but you can also just paint them. So I think I have a good example is uh, like the fur brushes. See if I can find them. Like this one's stylized, but let's check it out. So I'll select this one, make the brush a little bigger. But if I want to put some fur on an object, I mean, you can just paint it right on there. So versus having to know how to set up these shader nodes. And then if you look at this will actually take height data with it. So when I bring it to Blender, it'll actually displace the mesh, or it will um, create the normal map to like pretend to displace the mesh. So you actually get some shading effects, and it'll make it look 3D, even though all you had to do was paint right onto it. So um, you know, here's some hide, and you can play with the flow, basically how strong the brush is. You can play with having it skip and just do patches. So if you're doing things like scars or rust or anything else, maybe you just want a different color of this leather. It just paints in increments. It's just crazy what you can do with it. And um, anything you do in here is just based on materials from Blender. So if you attach different materials to different parts of the mesh and bring it over, Substance will recognize all of those different materials as different parts of the object, and you can paint them and apply materials separately so you don't override anything. But yeah, it's very cool. And I've actually used stable diffusion to generate textures, and then I've brought them into there's this Substance sampler, and you can bring images in and um, extract 3D data from the images. So I've actually made 3D materials by using AI generated rock textures. I think that's actually one of my YouTube videos. So, if you're interested in texturing and stuff, look into that. I don't use AI for a lot of things, but I think for texturing, that's a great use because it saves a ton of time and you get really good results out of it. But yeah, so Substance and just the Creative Cloud in general. I bought the pack with Substance Painter, Sampler, and Designer, and they have a lot of tools in there that I use for texturing. Just because I'm not a texture nodes guy, I'm not a shading nodes guy, so I just don't do that. I don't know it as well as some people, so I don't spend the time trying to dink around with nodes. Um, I can do some simple ones like sand and wood texture and stuff like that in Blender custom, but otherwise it's just time that I don't have to do something else. Um, CAD AI, great work, efficiency multiplier. Yeah, yeah, it is. Um, and I honestly I don't even use it that much now. I might look into it again, but just like to me, to me, using it for something like just rock texture or just a soil texture is the best possible use case for this stuff because I'm not I'm not going into Google Images and grabbing somebody's photo for free. I'm not having to go out and scan it myself. It's generating some sort of generic rock shape that I can use, and that's kind of what I do with it. I don't really generate like entire images in Stable Diffusion or anything like that, but there's a ton of ways to use AI, and um, I mean, I think there's plenty that are super ethical even. So not, I'm not commenting on whether they're ethical or not. I'm just saying there's a lot of great ways to use it that get overlooked. But yeah, I wonder if I can find my file for that video, because I could show you what did I call that? I have to find it in my list of stuff. AI textures. Oak bark. So actually, a lot of these images that you're seeing right now, I'm looking through one of the files for my video actually to see. I don't think it was this one. Um, maybe this one. Yeah. So this one, my PC is not going to be happy with me, but um, this one I actually generated this texture from the Stable Diffusion uh, plugin for Blender, and brought the texture into Substance Sampler, created a 3D material off of it, and then brought it back into Blender and applied it to this. It's just a cylinder. There's no actual mesh, um, deformation on my end. I didn't sculpt it or anything. But here's what it looks like, and you can even see if I zoom in here on the edge, you can even see it displaces um, the surface so that the lighting actually interacts with it and it creates proper shadows. So like this was a super cool way to generate a really high quality texture like that. And that's what I've used AI for, and I think that's pretty awesome. And really, I mean, look at even the ground. You know, the ground was the same deal, just a soil generated from Stable Diffusion, and um, brought it into Sampler and created this and slapped it on there. So, but and to me, making nodes for this kind of texture was going to take a really long time, just because I don't know how to do it. So yeah, so I wouldn't call it cheating. It's just a workaround. And I think it takes so long to get a scene made in Blender, to do any animating and all that, that you only have time to do what you're really good at or what you really want to do. Yeah. Our frames are looking pretty good over here though. We're already at 150. We're starting to take longer though. The 4090, we're doing 1 minute and 13 seconds per frame now. Looks great. I've not gotten around yet to setting up Stable Diffusion plugin for Blender. Definitely intend to, as I want to attempt to upscale my um, older game textures for models. I'm not cheating on my wife. It's just a workaround. Yeah, well, you got to do what you got to do with texturing. Definitely. Okay, so attempt to upscale older game textures for models. Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. I met some guys the other day that uh, they build virtual pinball machines. So they were showing me some of their stuff, and I can't tell which ones are renders or pictures from the ones they find in reality to use as references. It's wild. So, that's awesome. Yeah, upscaling older game textures. So you're talking about downloading them, upscaling them by AI, and then reinstalling the textures on the game. Because if so, that's pretty cool. But yeah, I mean, um, I've said this before, but 3D work is really, um, it comes down to finding the most efficient way to trick the viewer. At some point, there's just no time to actually do everything that people think you have to do. So you cut corners where you can, and you put seams on the back of objects, and your textures overlap in places where no one will see it, and that is what it is. All right, these are these are going pretty well. Let's see what. So render 7. Let's run another. Run another frame here and see what it did. So I'm just gonna. You know what? Maybe maybe it can't use open image denoising. Thought it could, but I'm gonna try to restart this one more time, and we'll see when it gets to the denoising section at the end of the frame, if it crashes again or not. Okay, yeah. So see, it started back on frame 53, which is the one that it broke while it was rendering earlier. So hopefully we'll see if it can get this one done or not. It looks like it's running fine. I think one thing that was happening the other day though, when I tested this GPU, the the software seems to be concerned with keeping the machine quiet instead of keeping it cool. And I am so used to sitting in the heat of the room and the noise of the fans that it doesn't bother me to hear them. So I think I need to crank up the fans because I'm wondering if they don't just get a little too hot trying to save noise. Because the cooler on this card is actually pretty substantial. 4,096 samples are but a bit much for such a simple scene. EV guy, don't speak cycles. Yes, maybe, but the other thing. So, and it's probably not going to happen on this GPU. But let's go back to the 4090. Well, that was good timing. Watch how the samples will start to speed up. In cycles, if you don't need the samples, it'll burn through them really fast. Like right now, look at how it's running these. It's at 2300, 2500. It's just going really fast. So basically what it's going to do is it's going to run either 4096 samples at the worst, or it's going to get to the point where the noise is at that lower noise threshold. So if you look at my render settings, I have set it so that, of course, I can't change those because it's rendering. Um, but I have it set at a 1% noise threshold. So it's basically gonna be either or. Um, and I would say a lot of samples, a lot of the time people will run like 1024 samples. So yeah, 4096 is quite a bit. But I always look for that speed up to happen because I want to make sure that I'm not going to have noise. If I have noise that doesn't match between the frames, it's going to just make it like super sparkly. You know, you're going to have the denoising artifacts because they won't match up. So, in a roundabout way, I'm trying to remove all of the noise. But if you actually set the render limit for noise to 0, it's going to take forever. So, but that's the way I interpret it. You're either going to run all the samples or you're going to hit the noise threshold and then burn through the samples fast. But that's a good question. Yeah. And I don't a few people have sent me some frames to render and a couple of those were in Eevee and like the 4090 just completely burns through them. So I'm curious to see if there are Eevee scenes that are heavy enough to like bog down a GPU. But you know, I just don't use Eevee enough to have ever dealt with that. Oh man. Well, we're about a third of the way done. As satisfying as it is to watch the rendering happen, I am probably going to have to call it quits for the tonight because I got to get up early tomorrow, go out in the heat, and do some bridge inspections. So I'm going to give it just a couple minutes here if anybody has anything else to say, and then um, I'll be posting the final render for this little guy probably tomorrow night, and then I'm going to do the second part of the low poly Minotaur stream this week probably. I A few people watch that. I think they're fun. I think over time I'll have enough of those little character series that people will want to watch them. Maybe I'll get better at being efficient in those. So watch for that. And then if I get more GPUs to test, or hopefully I can swap with a certain friend of mine who has a 6800 XT, we can swap some cards around and do some more benchmarking because I really want to see the A770 versus the 6800 XT. I think that's going to be one of the best matchups in recent times just because they're so close in hardware. Eburum says, "Thanks for the entertainment and education. You are welcome. Thank you for hanging out, through this whole stream. It's it's always a ton of fun for me. So, I can't thank you guys enough for being here and supporting me." Abdallah says, "They definitely can bog down. Google Eevee tree creature. Still faster than Cycles. Um, don't know about Cycles X. Yeah, I don't. Cycles X is a little faster, mostly for denoising, but um, you know, it's still going to be slower than Eevee. I guess I'll just say that, no matter what. But yeah, I'll have to check it out. But yeah, no. Thanks for being here, guys and gals, and whoever showed up today. I can't thank you enough for the support, and hopefully I got a lot more cool stuff coming soon. But yeah, for now I'm gonna go sleep about 5 hours and go do some bridges in the heat. So yeah, and if anybody has ideas of like a scene or a simulation they want to see or whatever, just just hit me up in comments or send an email or whatever. And you know, one thing I can always use is cool ideas. So just let me know. No, thank you for being here. Yeah, thank you guys. It's a lot of fun, and I feel like I can just kind of relax and hang out instead of um, trying to crunch stuff out for a short video. So, to me this is where all the fun is, and I'm glad I finally started streaming because it's just different. But thanks for being here. I'm going to end it now, and I will hopefully talk to you guys all soon.